The night I graduated, my parents drove me to a bus stop instead of dinner. My gown was still damp from the ceremony, my backpack half-zipped, when Mom handed me $10 and said, "Good luck out there." Then she rolled up the window. My sister smirked from the back seat like she'd just watched a scene from her favorite show. The taillights disappeared down the road, and the world went silent except for the hum of streetlights. I stood there, holding that bill like proof I existed. 10 years later, I pulled up to a reunion they didn't know I'd been invited to, only this time they were the ones left speechless. I grew up in a house where love had rules, and I never seemed to follow them right. My mother, Marlene, worked at the local bank and believed security mattered more than dreams. My father, Frank, ran a small auto shop and said girls didn't need college, just common sense. My sister, Tessa, was their pride-polished, charming, the kind of person who could turn every mistake into a story worth applause. When she turned 16, she got a shiny silver car wrapped in a bow. On my 16th birthday, Mom handed me a used library card and said, "Books will take you farther." I smiled, pretending I believed her. At our dinner table, there were 4 wooden chairs and 1 foldable metal one, the one that squeaked every time I moved. Somehow, it always ended up being mine. Every meal felt like a silent test. I kept failing. When Tessa talked about her internship at a fashion company, Dad leaned in proud. When I mentioned fixing a broken clock or winning a science fair ribbon, he'd reach for the remote. Mom would nod absently and say, "That's nice, honey," already turning back to Tessa. I used to wonder how many ways a person could disappear without leaving the room. The truth was, I didn't want to be Tessa. I just wanted to be seen. I loved circuits patterns, how pieces fit together to make something work. My teachers noticed it before my family ever did. When I got an acceptance letter from the University of Washington partial scholarship for engineering, I thought maybe that would be the moment. The proof that I was worth investing in. But when I handed Mom the letter, she barely looked up from chopping apples. "Seattle. That's too far. And engineering isn't for girls, Irene. Be realistic." She said the word like a verdict. Dad didn't even glance away from his newspaper. "If you want to go pay for it yourself, we're done handing things out." Tessa, home for the weekend, smirked from the counter. "Maybe you can build a robot that loves you since no one else will." Mom laughed softly, not cruelly, just carelessly. That hurt more. That night, I lay awake listening to their voices downstairs, praising Tessa's new promotion, her potential, her bright future. My scholarship letter sat on the nightstand, its edges curling under the weight of their indifference. I stared at the ceiling and made myself a quiet promise if no one was going to build a path for me, I'd make my own. Graduation day was supposed to feel like freedom, but in our house, it felt like eviction day. Mom kept reminding me, "Once school's over, you need to start standing on your own 2 feet. She said it with that clipped tone that made it sound like advice but felt like warning. Dad grumbled about rent bills and dead weight. The only person who didn't say much was Tessa, but her silence was smug enough. The morning of the ceremony, she twirled in front of the mirror in a designer dress. "Try not to sweat in your gown," she said. "It's the only nice thing you own." I ignored her even as the sting burned under my skin. At the ceremony, families cheered, shouted names, waved banners. My parents sat in the back row, stone-faced. No photos, no hugs. When I walked across that stage, the applause I heard wasn't theirs, it was from strangers. Afterward, I found them waiting by the car. "We should get going," Mom said briskly. "Your father's got work early. I thought we were heading home." Instead, the SUV slowed by the small bus station just outside Bloomington. The air was thick with summer heat, the kind that clings to your clothes. Dad put the car in park. Mom turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is it, sweetheart. Time to start your next chapter," she said, pressing a crumpled $10 bill into my palm. I blinked. "What you said you wanted to be independent," she replied, already checking her phone. "Here's your chance." My chest tightened. "You're dropping me off?" "Here, don't make it dramatic," Dad muttered. "You'll figure it out. Everyone does." Tessa leaned across the back seat, her perfume too sweet, her grin too sharp. "Good luck surviving with that," she whispered, nodding at the $10. Then the door shut. The SUV rolled away, gravel crunching under its tires until all that was left were the sounds of cicadas and the flicker of a dying streetlight. I stood there in my blue gown, clutching my diploma like it was something solid to hold on to. For a while, I waited like maybe they'd circle back laughing say it was a test a lesson. But the road stayed empty. The realization hit slowly they weren't coming back. Not tonight, not ever. By midnight, I'd spent most of that $10 on a sandwich and a bottle of water from a nearby store. The clerk didn't ask questions. When the rain started, I dragged my gown around my shoulders like a blanket and sat under the flickering light staring at my reflection in the bus stop glass. Somewhere between fear and fury, something inside me hardened. If this was their version of love, conditional disposable, then fine. I'd make sure they'd never mistake silence for weakness again. The first night alone felt endless. I remember every sound, the hiss of the rain against the pavement, the buzz of the streetlight, the distant howl of a freight train cutting through the dark. By morning, I was soaked hungry and exhausted, but I was still standing. The bus pulled in around dawn. I didn't even ask where it was going. I just got on. It dropped me off 30 miles away in a town I'd never heard of. Cracked sidewalks, faded shop signs, a diner with a flickering neon light that read, "Open 24 hours." I walked in dripping rainwater onto the floor. The woman behind the counter, short, sturdy with kind eyes, looked me over. "You lost or looking for work?" she asked. "Work," I said, barely above a whisper. That was how I met Mrs. Rios. She handed me an apron and pointed toward the sink. "Start with dishes. If you quit, you don't get your check early." Those first weeks were brutal. My hands stayed red from hot water and detergent. I slept in the diner's storage room when I couldn't afford the bus to anywhere else. But it was the first place that didn't ask where I came from, just what I could do. Mrs. Rios noticed how I organized things, plates stacked by size schedules lined up on scraps of paper. "You've got an engineer's brain," she said once. "Don't waste it." A delivery driver named Caleb started showing up most nights. He was quiet but sharp, the kind of man who saw patterns in chaos. One night when I was hauling boxes, he stopped me. "You're carrying that wrong," he said, taking half the load. Efficiency matters even when no one's watching. He taught me little things, routes, timing, how to cut wasted miles. I began to see the world differently, like every road was a puzzle waiting to be solved. I saved every dollar I could sleeping in a small room above a laundromat when I finally scraped together enough for rent. At the library, I used the free Wi-Fi to watch tutorials on logistics spreadsheets and supply chain management. I took notes on napkins on receipts on the back of diner order pads. The diner became my classroom, the deliveries my experiments. By the time I turned 23, I landed a part-time job at Northline Freight logging shipments for minimum wage. But when I noticed their routes wasted hours of driving time, I couldn't stay silent. I rearranged one schedule, printed it out, and left it on my manager's desk. The next morning, he called me in. "You just saved us fuel and labor," he said. "How'd you figure that out?" I shrugged. Patterns. He smiled. "Keep doing whatever that is." That night, I walked home through the rain again, but it didn't feel cold anymore. I'd built something small, but it was mine. Years passed quietly, marked by truck engines, glowing screens, and the hum of fluorescent lights. By 26, I had moved from an assistant to operations coordinator at Northline Freight. I spent nights redesigning delivery routes, days managing dispatchers twice my age. The maps on my wall looked like arteries, all pulsing toward one goal movement without waste. When I finally built a working prototype of my own route optimization tool, I called it Wayfinder. It was simple, efficient, and mine. By 27, I quit Northline, registered the business, and turned my tiny apartment into a startup office. 2 years later, Wayfinder Systems was operating across 12 states, saving clients millions in fuel and time. My name, now legally Irene Reed, appeared in logistics journals I used to read for free at the library. I thought I'd buried the past until one email changed everything. The subject line read, "Family Reunion 10 years since graduation." It was from Aunt Lila. "Everyone will be there," the message said. "Your parents, Tessa, even Grandma Ruth. It would mean a lot if you came." My first instinct was to delete it, but something deep inside me whispered, "Go." Not for revenge, for recognition, to see what silence had done to them. The night of the reunion, my driver pulled the limo up to the curb outside the community center in Bloomington, the same town where they'd left me. I stared out at the red brick building glowing under string lights. Music and laughter spilled into the parking lot. "Do you want me to wait, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Yes," I said. "But don't worry, I won't be long." When I stepped out, the conversations near the door faltered. The heels of my slate gray shoes clicked against the concrete. I wore a simple silk dress, pearl earrings, hair tied in a low bun. Power disguised as grace. Inside a banner read, "Vale Family Reunion." I scanned the crowd faces I hadn't seen in a decade. Aunt Lila waved first, eyes bright with emotion. "Irene," she gasped, hurrying over. "Oh, honey, look at you." "It's Reed now," I said softly. "But yes, it's me." She squeezed my hands. "You came." I can't believe it. Neither could they. Across the room, my mother stood by the buffet table, her silver hair swept perfectly back, posture rigid. My father nursed a drink, avoiding eye contact. And Tessa, still immaculate, still magnetic, was holding court among cousins, laughing like she owned the air. When my mother finally noticed me, her face froze. Then came the polite confusion, the faint narrowing of her eyes. She didn't recognize me, not yet. I signed in at the table near the entrance. The volunteer glanced up. "Oh, you're with Wayfinder Systems, right? You're the event's sponsor. Thank you so much for your generosity." "Of course," I said, smiling faintly. "Glad to support the community." A few heads turned, my mother's most of all. Her expression flickered something between disbelief and dread. The dinner began, chatter filling the hall. Aunt Lila eventually took the microphone to thank everyone for coming. "And tonight," she said, "we'd like to acknowledge our sponsor for making this event possible." My mother's fork paused midair. "Please welcome Ms. Irene Reed, founder and CEO of Wayfinder Systems." The applause rose, scattered and hesitant. I stood, slowly, heels echoing against the floor as I walked to the small stage. The microphone felt cold in my hand. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm. "It's been a long time since I attended a family gathering." A ripple of awkward laughter. I smiled slightly. 10 years ago, I stood at a bus stop not far from here, 18 years old, wearing my graduation gown, holding a backpack and $10. My mother told me, "Good luck out there," and then she drove away. Silence spread like ink. I thought that night was the end of something. I continued. But it turned out to be a beginning. Every mile I walked, every job I took, every night I stayed up learning how to build a better route, it led me here. I paused, scanning the room. My mother's face was pale. My father looked down at his drink. Tessa's lips parted slightly, her practiced composure faltering. "So, tonight," I said, "I'd like to announce a new initiative, the Benchlight Grant. It's a scholarship for students who have no family support, who are told to be realistic instead of being believed in. Because no one should ever have to start with nothing but a bus ticket and a broken heart." Applause built slowly, then stronger, until the entire hall echoed with it. But my parents didn't move. When it finally quieted, I stepped off the stage. Aunt Lila hugged me hard, whispering, "You did it, sweetheart." Outside, the cool night air hit my skin like release. I thought I was done until I heard it. "Irene." The voice behind me was unmistakable. My mother stood by the door, my father a few steps behind, Tessa trailing with arms crossed. "You could have told us," Mom said quietly. "You could have told us it was you sponsoring all this. We're still your family." I turned to face her, the lamplight carving sharp shadows between us. "You told me that too before you left me at a bus stop." Her mouth opened, then shut. My father's jaw tightened. "We did what we had to," he muttered. "You needed to grow up." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small plastic sleeve. Inside was the same crumpled $10 bill, perfectly preserved. I set it on the nearby table. "This," I said softly, "is all you gave me to grow up with." My mother's breath caught. "You kept that." "I did," I said, "because I wanted to remember exactly where I started." Tessa stepped forward, voice trembling. "We were trying to teach you independence. You've done well. Isn't that what you wanted?" I met her eyes. "No, Tessa. I wanted a family. but I built a future instead. For a moment, no one spoke. The night hummed with the sound of cars on the highway. Aunt Lila appeared behind them, her face stern. "You left her with $10 and a bus stop," she said to my parents. "She turned it into a company that keeps people moving. That's more than any of you ever taught her." Grandma Ruth wheeled herself closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You left her out there that night. I never forgave you for that." My mother's tears finally fell. My father turned away, shoulders rigid. Tessa's face crumpled, shame replacing arrogance. I picked up the $10 bill again and tucked it back into my clutch. "I don't need apologies," I said. "I just needed to see if anything had changed. It hasn't." They stayed silent. I turned toward the waiting limo, gravel crunching under my heels. "Keep your seats," I said gently without looking back. "I've built my own table." As the door closed behind me, I saw their reflections in the window, small, stunned, and still standing under the same light that had once watched me cry. The drive back to Seattle felt quieter than I expected. The road stretched wide and dark ahead, lit only by passing headlights. In my lap sat the small plastic sleeve with the $10 bill creased, faded, but intact. The same night they left me, that bill had been a sentence. Now it was a signature. Proof that I'd rewritten everything they once decided for me. When the limo merged onto the interstate, I caught my reflection in the glass. Not the scared girl in a graduation gown, but the woman who built her own map. Every company contract, every mile tracked by Wayfinder systems was a road back to that bus stop and far beyond it. I thought about Grandma Ruth's trembling voice, Aunt Lila's proud tears, the silence that hung between me and my parents. I didn't feel rage anymore, just distance. Clean, quiet distance. They had taught me what abandonment felt like. I had taught myself what direction meant. As the city lights appeared on the horizon, I took one last look at the bill and whispered, "Thank you for the push." Then I slid it back into my bag beside the company key card engraved with my name, Irene Reed, CEO. Justice didn't come from payback. It came from peace. Before going home, I asked the driver to take one last detour. County Road, 17, the old bus stop. The same bench, the same flickering light, only now it looked smaller, harmless even. I stepped out heels, crunching the gravel, and placed a small bouquet of wildflowers on the seat. Beside it, I set the $10 bill, still sealed in its plastic sleeve. "This is where you left me," I whispered. "And this is where I learned to move." The wind was soft that night, brushing past like a quiet apology from the universe. I turned, walked back to the car, and never looked over my shoulder again. If someone ever left you behind, don't wait for their return. Build your own road. And when you do tell me where you're watching from, I promise you're not alone.